Good evening and welcome to tonight's Hearthstone Half Hour. I'm Hammy, this is Falcraft Cast. Hope you're very well this Monday in April, wherever you are in the world. It's been a bank holiday weekend in the UK. Great to have some time off Friday, Easter Sunday and bank holiday Monday. So back to work tomorrow, but until then we're going to jump into some more Hearthstone. A lot of laddering over the weekend, flying up to the dizzying heights of rank 7 and then plummeting back down quite a long way. So how I came about this new Player Monday topic, which we are going to be covering, Ramp Druid, is you may find when you're going up and down the ladder, you get a bit in a funk with a particular deck and you're thinking, oh, it's not working, I'm coming across something that is just killing me every single time and I'm losing my health so quickly, and you just get in a bit of a funk with your current deck. So in a bit of a funk the other night, I decided to grab a random new deck, play it a bit in casual mode and then take it onto the ladder at about rank 10 and had a bit of fun with it. I'm not going to say it was perfect. So what we're going to do tonight is run you through the idea of Druid and Ramp. And when we did a Hearthstone half hour about deck acceleration, and I was trying to call it sort of something else, someone suggested in comments on YouTube, thank you very much, that Ramp is the term I'm looking for, and it absolutely is. So let's go through the concepts of Druid and Ramp. We're going to do what we always do in a new Player Monday and take a deck list, run through it and build it to show what we mean, and then finally we're going to take it into a few casual games just to show off what the deck can do, its strengths, maybe some of its weaknesses, and a little bit in a basic way about how to play it. So that's what we're going to do this evening. So why Druid Ramp, of all things? I've not played huge amounts of Druid and I really need to. Druid is rife. People are sort of sorting out in tournament play. When it comes to looking at the higher ranks of ladder, you see a bunch of Druids kicking around. You may see Watcher Druids. We need to go and have a proper look at Watcher Druids, Control Druids, there's sort of various aggro Druid variants. So what is Ramp? Why a Ramp Druid? When I was bouncing around levels sort of 11, 10 on the ladder and that just recently, I saw a whole bunch of these come up. And the concept of Ramp, we articulated in the Hearthstone half hour on deck acceleration. You can see that on YouTube. Ramp is effectively, for if you're new to card games or a bit of a new player, it's how quickly you get your deck going. In broad terms, if you're able to ramp quickly, you might have cards that accelerate your deck. They will let you play cards sooner than you normally could. So anything that ramps quickly is something that you will get a good benefit from. So examples, we use the Druid as an example in that Hearthstone half hour episode. We've also taken a look at the Warlock. So Warlock cards, they ramp. You can play powerful cards quickly. However, they have some kind of downside, and this Druid Ramp deck is very, very similar. So the goal of this Druid Ramp deck is to use the cards that Druids have as innate as part of their class oh so well to get powerful minions out very, very quickly. Now, this Druid Ramp deck revolves around tanking minions and then swings in with some big late finishes. So what we're just going to do is chop everything out of this I Love Ramp. I was having a little Anchorman moment when naming this deck, so if you're fans of Brick and the general weather and Anchorman, you'll get it. If not, what can I say? I'm only human. My weakness is Anchorman. And fabulous Ron Burgundiness it is too. So, Ramp Druid, what is our goal here? So, Druids have great ramping, they have great deck acceleration, they have some really core cards such as Innervate that will let you get more for less sooner rather than later. So, Druid Ramp revolves around increasing the amount of mana crystals that you have early in the game through use of pretty much 3 key cards. You've got Innervate, self-explanatory, gaining 2 mana crystals this turn only. That will let you very simply play a higher mana card faster than you would normally be able to. If you want to play a 4 mana card on turn 2, etc, etc, etc. So Innervate, 0 mana as well cost, so very, very strong. The next card is Wild Growth. Now, Wild Growth, for the cost of 2 mana, gains you an empty mana crystal. Now, what that means is if I'm on 2 mana and I play Wild Growth, obviously I spend my 2 mana, but then suddenly I have 3 mana crystals. So next turn I have 4 mana crystals. So what playing this card does, for the cost of 2 mana, it effectively, next go, puts me 1 turn further on in terms of the mana crystals I've accumulated. So again, I'm getting more mana more quickly, but obviously the negative side of this is that this turn is effectively, it's not a wasted turn, but it's a turn where I've not played anything on the board, I've not tried to control my opponent's minions, I've not done any damage to my opponent. So again, you are trading off short-term gain for longer-term gain. So that is how this Druid Ramp deck is kind of working at the moment. We'll see the pros and cons of that when we get into the deck list. And the third card that we have a look at, really in terms of this sort of ramping Druid style, it was popular sort of in the early beta times. I say early beta times, that was sort of only, last Christmas or so not too long ago, is Nourish. So Nourish, you can choose one. Now 5 mana for drawing 3 cards, that is expensive. If you think of things like the Mage, Arcane Intellect, the amount of cards that you can draw with a Mage for the sheer amount of mana spent, it is less mana and comparable cards. So I'm glad to see that people in the chat love a bit of Lamp as much as I do. Well, I love Ramp. Ramp is a whole bunch of fun. So Nourish, gaining those 2 mana crystals, again, if we've just taken a look at going back to when we are, if we take a look at Wild Growth, Nourish is a bigger Wild Growth, but you can also have that benefit of drawing the 3 cards as well. So if I'm throwing out Innervate, if I'm throwing out Nourishes, then suddenly I'm really ramping up the amount of mana I have. Early to mid-game, it will be a lot more than I'd normally have at that point if I'm adding 1 mana crystal a turn. So that is the core of this deck. Druid has this innate ramping, it has this built-in acceleration to let you play more quickly. However, as we've just discussed, the disadvantage is whenever you are setting this up, you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to attack from minions, you're vulnerable to whatever your opponent is doing. So you need to very carefully when playing this deck strike the balance. Strike the balance between getting yourself ramped up, getting yourself really in position to play those cards as soon as you can, but also making sure that by the time you've got your fancy combo off, you've not lost the game. So a nice piece of balance needs to be done there. So what we're going to do is what we always do on our New Player Monday. We might rename this, but we take a deck list that we found somewhere on the internet, we build it, we play it, we give you a list to it, and we always sort of walk through it just so you know when you're deck listing, and many people do deck list when they first play card games, and there's no reason why you shouldn't if you're a new to intermediate player, or whether you're an experienced player just wanting to try something else. But it's good to know how the deck works as you go along. So we're going to go through that as we go. Let's grab a list. So what I will do is I will link this in the description of the YouTube video afterwards. I will also link it in the chat when we're out chatting through it, and just to show you the list that we're taking a look at. The list we're taking a look at is a list from someone called Forcedog himself. He's on Reddit in Reddit Hearthstone, so I will just stick the list in so you can have a little bit of a look at it as we are going through, but it will also be in the description of this video after the game, and I'll annotate it in, so don't worry about that. So what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is grab Innervate. So Innervate, as we previously discussed, 2 mana crystals for this turn only. Now what can I do with Innervate? I could perhaps play an early Wild Growth, I could play a Nourish a bit sooner, but really Innervate, such a core card. Let's say for example I am facing a deck such as Zoo Warlock, something that gets a lot of minions out early in the game and puts a lot of pressure on me. I have a choice with Innervate. I can either accelerate my ramping, so I can start playing Wild Growths and Nourishes and get those mana crystals sooner, or I can perhaps accelerate out a minion. Suddenly there are lots of little minions coming towards me and I don't know what to do. I get a big tanky minion out, protect myself, and make that balance. So one thing about this deck is Innervate accelerates you, but you need to know, and you get a feel for which way you want to accelerate your deck. Next up I'm going to take 2 Mark of the Wild. Mark of the Wild, Taunt and 2/2, that's a great way of taking some of the minions you have in the deck and making them ridiculously tough. Cairn Bloodhoof will come on later. Imagine Cairn Bloodhoof, when he dies he spawns Bane Bloodhoof. Imagine what happens if you give him Taunt, 2/2, an absolute monster. So Mark of the Wild. Also, you can use it as a tech. So say for example there's an opponent minion I want to get past. Maybe I want to get it to that 7 attack level that lets me play Big Game Hunter. So I can jump on in, I can play Mark of the Wild even on my opponent's minion, Big Game Hunter, something wild. Not to be confused with Gym of the Wild. I do love the flavour text. So Mark of the Wild, very situationally useful in a bunch of situations. Buffing up your own minions, occasionally triggering fancy plays with your opponent's minions. Good to have a couple of those in there. Next up, Wild Growth. We've explained what Wild Growth is in there. It gives you your ramping, gives you those empty mana crystals sooner, and effectively means that early to mid game you just have more mana at your disposal than your opponent will, providing you're still alive, which is of course very useful in most games. Next up we have none other than Wrath. Wrath, that workhorse of the Druid deck. This is clearance. Wrath will let you pick off those minions with the 3 damage, but ideally you can be doing a 1 damage and drawing a card. Sometimes if you feel as though you're not under threat, then maybe doing a 1 damage and drawing a card is good with Wrath, but sometimes just in the early game you're just using Wrath as a tool to survive. You need to be picking off the opponent's side of the table as much as you can. So when you're playing this particular Druid Ramp deck list, you are a little bit vulnerable in the early game, and Wrath is one of the tools you have to survive. Now, when we look at the final deck list when we finished, we can go through perhaps some changes that could be made to this deck list. There are several different versions of this Ramp deck. I will give a bunch in the blog article when it goes up as well, but you can just Google Druid Ramp deck or similar and you can see lots of different versions. We'll go through those in the future. In goes Ramp. Now, a nice little tech that our friend had in this deck. Oh, he's not crazy. It's crazed. It's not Aerosmith related. The Crazed Alchemist. So why is this good? The battle cry of swapping the attack and health of a minion in this deck with the big minions that you have sets up some really, really good late game plays. So we'll get those late game cards in and we'll come back to Crazed Alchemist to explain exactly why that is so good. Healing Touch then goes in next, just one, situational, but in this deck, while you're setting up, if you think about it, you're going to take some hits. So you're going to want to heal off those hits and make sure you're not in a critical level of health. So that Healing Touch is really to make sure you can keep yourself in the game if you've been taking a lot of abuse, a lot of beatings on your hero in the early game. Next up, again, Big Master. Sinjin's Shieldmaster. I'm actually thinking of the Big Game Hunter. Again, a tech card, situational, can be swapped for other things, but that destroying a minion with attack of 7 or more, that is letting you pick off big threats, get past taunting minions, all different kinds of things. So, Big Game Hunter, an excellent card to drop into a whole bunch of decks. Here it's used to get rid of big things in your way. Next up, we are going for a single bite. Now, the bite not only gives you armor, but it lets you trade. So, again, if in the early to mid game you're needing to remove threats from the table, get things out your way, bite can be an execute late in the game. You can drop it to help you finish off your opposing hero, but it's really a part crowd clearance tool, getting rid of stuff on your opponent's side of the board in terms of minions, and also can be an execute. Sometimes I've even just played it just to put that armor on me to protect me. So Bite comes in as a sort of a jack of all trades, but predominantly to do with crowd control, crowd clearance, making sure you keep your opponent's minions under control. Next up, Swipe. 4 damage to an enemy, 1 damage to all other enemies. Self-explanatory. If I'm playing a Zoo Warlock, if I'm playing someone who's swarming with Hunters, Murlocs, you name it, all of that kind of thing. Stuff with low health, brilliant. It helps me soften stuff up. It might help me weaken something to knock it out. It might let me clear my opponent's entire side of the board in one go if they're playing with really, really small minions. So Swipe, a clearance tool, it can be a damage tool. It's really to keep, again, your opponent's side of the board under control. It may be killing everything, it may just be softening up big minions, it might be used to hit the final blow to your opposing hero as well. So to Swipe, you will find in very many variants of this deck, and indeed other aggressive aggro druid decks as well. The next is the lovely Keeper of the Grove. I've got a golden one, I shall use that. That just keep your groves without asking. Incredibly rude. I don't have a grove, but he looks fairly safe to leave it in the hands of. Keeper of the Grove, 2 of those. Now, key. That ability there, dealing 2 damage or silencing a minion. 2 damage picks off a whole veritable smorgasbord of threats. If you're playing rush decks, invaluable. Silencing a minion can remove taunts, it can silence Ysera's, big late game minions that are dangerous, anything that buffs up in a hurry. I'm thinking of anything from questing adventurers through to anything that thrives off of card plays. So really, really versatile card in some situations. Also against shamans and warlocks, you just need those to stay alive. You need those in your hand real quick. And of course with the Mark of the Wild, you can throw on a Mark of the Wild, buff up that Keeper of the Grove, and suddenly he's a 4/6 tank, just like a Druid of the Claw. So versatile, damage dealing, executing, threat removing. Keeper of the Grove has got it all in spades. 2 of those drop into control Druid decks as well as these aggro variants. A really, really nice card to have in. So we have already discussed Nourish. Helps your ramping, and also of note in the late game, if you're very, very desperate, you can draw 3 cards with it too. Nourish goes in there. Next, Druid of the Claw ×2. Very versatile, and of course it has those options of either jumping in for that attacking option with the charge, or the other thing that you can do is pull on out and taunt up with the taunt option as well, and it gives you a nice 4/6 tank. So if you want to be going in to charge in for a whole bunch of pressure, that's cool. If you want to be putting up walls, and this deck does revolve around putting up some protection, then the Druid of the Claw is an excellent choice also. Next up is the Faceless Manipulator. Now I do love, this is a wonderful element of Forstallg Yoldog deck. Now the Faceless Manipulator just has so many uses. Some people might see it as being a bit gimmicky. It is inconsistent, and sometimes, being brutally honest with you, it can sit in your hand as a dead card. But what it will let you do is multiply your threats. It will let you multiply your tanks. If you put up all of your big cheap wall cards, then this will really protect you even further. Or if you want to be countering opponent threats, you can counter opponent threats with it. Copying a Ragnaros, for example, or indeed other very dangerous cards as well. You can use it to copy your Ancients of War and Ancients of Law. So many good uses. There are 2 of these in. That's quite unusual, but it is hilarious, but it's also very useful when it comes off. So it's a tech card. It can be deadwood depending on your game situation, but 2 of them in here is a lot of fun. If I was thinking of tweaking this, I might drop it down to 1. Just in case. Next up, Cairn Bloodhoof, out of the legendaries, and I think this is actually our first legendary in this deck. He's a ridiculously solid legendary that shows up in so many decks due to his Death Rattle. He is a 2 for the price of 1 if ever there was one. His solid attack stat and health stat means that he's not easy to remove, and the very act of dropping him on the table means that a lot of opponents worry and sort of charge on top of him and try and get rid of him as soon as possible. He lets you make plays, make trades, and really helps you wrest board control in many ways. And of course, in this deck, drop a Mark of the Wild on him, you suddenly have a fearsome tank who, when he's killed, just comes back to life again. Incredibly annoying. Sunwalker. Now, I actually had 2 Sunwalkers in my version of this deck. I think I could probably drop to 1. The reason I put 2 in was because I was trying to replace the Black Knight, which we'll go through in a second. But Sunwalker, again, if you accelerate this out, the Taunt and Divine Shield is just another really solid wall that keeps you alive. Lets you make trades. Again, this deck revolves around putting up big health, awkward to remove, high health cards with lots of taunts, so that you can then just overrun and swarm over your opponent. Now, if I'm going to craft my next legendary, it will probably be this gentleman here. The Black Knight was in our friend Forstall's version of this deck. And the Black Knight really just lets you, it's a tech card that lets you pick through opposing taunts. So if I'm playing a Druid deck with loads of taunts up, you name it, anything that puts a big wall in your way, the Black Knight will let you just trample straight through it. You can destroy that minion with taunt in 1, and remember, of course, that for the 6 mana you're getting a fairly solid minion, but you're just removing an opponent's threat straight off the table, no questions asked. If it's a big scary taunting card, not only will it let you attack, but it will again tip the board control in your favour. So I don't have a Black Knight, so I've gone for 2 Sunwalkers. An equally good choice would be me perhaps putting in another kind of silencing card, because really the Black Knight is in there to remove taunts, so I could equally maybe drop a Spellbreaker or something in there as well. The Ancient of Lore. One of these goes in. Now this, most of the time, is played for its, well, 50% of the time for its heal. You've only got 1 heal there in the form of your Healing Touch. This is your second heal. You've only got 2 healing cards in this deck. The idea of this deck is that you have all those big tanks up, and your hero is really not taking too much damage because you've got lots of big, bulky, high health minions in the way. But the Ancient of Lore is there to give you that health if you need it, and it's saved my life on many an occasion, and also the draw 2 cards option in a pinch, quite handy as well. So that goes in there as a little bit of tech. Next up, I just need to drop out, so I actually drop those in the deck. Next up, 2 Ancient of War. Now this card, some people say, one of the most solid cards generally in the game. It's very easy to see why when you take a look at its bio. 5 attack, you've suddenly got a 10 attack, 5 health minion, or what we generally use it for in this deck is the 5 health and taunt option. So you've suddenly got a huge tank. Your opponents are going to be silencing. If they've got to attack it, it's going to take them so long to get through. And then if you're dropping Faceless Manipulators, Druids of the Claw, all kinds of stuff, you'll just have so many big tanks in the way that your opponent's not going to know how to get through them. They've only got so many kinds of removal. So that is why Ancient of War comes in. And then let's go back to our friend the Crazed Alchemist. If I swap the attack and health of a minion, if I play this as a 5/10 tank, suddenly, if I want to drop a Crazed Alchemist and I need to go in for an execute to finish the game, I can change it from 5/10 to 10/5. So I can have a 10/5 tank instead. So the Crazed Alchemist can suddenly give you a 10 attack minion in Ancient of War if you swap those 2 around. So a nice little play, nice little bit of synergy there. What do we have in terms of finishers? Well, this deck has Ragnaros the Firelord. Not much to say about Raggy. He tends to make it in most most decks that we construct here. but he's just very common in a bunch of decks. Again, one of those really solid legendaries. At the end of your turn, he just does 8 damage. As soon as you play him, your opponent has to react to him and deal with that threat. Beg pardon me. If he gets silenced, well, guess what? He's still an 8/8/8, 8 health, 8 attack minion, so even if he can't do his random 8 damage, he then becomes a really, really fearsome card that you can just slam into your opponents, because if the can't attack is silenced, of course he can just go ahead and attack like any other normal minion. So lovely stuff. And the final one, this could be switched for other things as well. It is varied, but in this version we've got a Ysera, so this deck can be done cheaper. Don't worry about all these legendaries, there are some replacements. But again, it's just a big finisher. Ysera, as soon as you drop, just causes problems. You're worried about the nightmares that do the 5/5. You're worried about the big minions that can be dropped. Dream, the dream card that just you can use to return a minion to the player's hand, whether your own or somebody else's. Real solid stuff. So that is our I Love Ramp Druid ramping deck list. And what is the goal? How do we play this deck? Well, very, very simply, in the early game we want to try and be innovating, we want to try and be wild growthing, we want to be either getting out mid-game minions ASAP, or we really want to go for broke and try and get a combo off into a Nourish. And then you can see that the bulk of our minions are in the mid to late game and really late game. Look at our mana curve. Although we have a bunch of cards at 2, it's worth noting that a lot of those are either control spells or things that are buffs. So what this deck is vulnerable. It is vulnerable in the first 2 or 3 turns. And what problems does it have? Zoo Warlocks, things that rush. If you're not drawing a swipe, if you're not drawing Wraths, if you're not able to get those Innervates and things and get your swipes and tanks out very, very soon, you can get overrun very quickly in the early game. So the guy who designed this deck used it pretty much solely on the higher echelons of the ladder, and I think the reason that they were probably doing that was that in those situations they were not finding perhaps so many, they were either playing in a metagame that did not have so many Zoo Warlocks in, or they weren't being rushed quite so much. I think they're probably playing more Druids, Control Warriors and things that don't try to get going so quickly, not quite so aggressive. So that is our deck. The second thing we're going to do is I just bring up I Love Ramp on our right column, so as we play you can see what we've got in it. We're going to jump in just to a quick game or two to show you this deck in action and what we do and how we try and play it. So it's all very good building it, but we need to show you how it can play. First thing up, we are playing a Shaman. I always jump into casual, and if you build a new deck I would very much advise you to play a few casuals as well. First hand here, I'm playing a Shaman. I'm worried about totems. I've got a Wild Growth and a Nourish. I quite like to keep both of those. Swipe is good control. I'm just going to trade one of those back. So generally with your starting hand and your mulligan strategy, what I would love was be a Keeper of the Grove, as I've discussed, for the silence, the 2 damage to pick off totems. Generally in a starting hand you want to keep swipes. There's a great guide by Forced Dog that I will also link when we cover this as well. And let's wish a little greetings. Okay, so what have we got? You generally want to hang on to swipes, nourishes, innovates, wild growths, things that will give you some control. I'm glad I've got a swipe because that will help me with totems if a bunch go down. In terms of first plays, you can see that actually I've got nothing I can play turn 2 or 3. I'm just going to coin straight into a wild growth. That's a very aggressive play, but you can see that although I've used my coin, I could have maybe saved the coin to get an early nourish as well. But wild growth is instantly giving me another mana crystal, so on turn 2 I'll have 3 mana crystals rather than the 2. So that is acceleration in action, ramping in action. Now, would it be better for me to perhaps save that coin? I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and the reason for that is if I'd saved it I could have been playing an earlier Nourish instead. As you see, I've got no 3 mana cards that were really worth accelerating into, so I'm just going to armour myself up and use my Druid Hero ability to maybe chip away a bit at this totem. So my concerns here, if the Shaman gets his big rush of minions out and I don't have things to counter them, then I'll be in trouble. Shaman's of course very good at synergising and playing cards that can get out early on. They can summon their totems. You can have Shaman Murloc rush decks, a lot of aggressive damage, and that is excellent stuff. I've got an Innervate as well, so this is a nice start. What options do I have? Well, you can see that already on my 3rd turn I've got 4 mana crystals. That Amani Berserker is a threat. I'm just going to go ahead with a raw swipe and just get rid of everything. Keep the table clear, and anything else I can do, I don't want to Mark of the Wild. Next turn I can go into a Nourish as well. I'm quite nicely, touch wood, set up to push on with this game. So when you are playing this kind of Druid Ramp deck, you can see here that I've already managed to negotiate the early game okay. If I was against a rushing Warlock or Hunter, I might be in a lot more problems by this stage. In the mid game you have to make a few decisions, and it's get greedy, whether I just try and nourish and sit for one more turn before crying havoc, or whether you immediately keep the board under control. So it's balancing board control against getting greedy and pushing yourself into better positions on the table. I'm going to go for getting greedy here. Now you notice that I'm going to nourish, so now I have 7 mana crystals. And note that with nourish you also get 2 of those refunded right away. So I can actually go into a second play here. Now happily I have Innervate. What I'm then going to do is drop the Keeper of the Grove, and I'm going to go ahead and silence that minion. So I've removed his tank. An equally valid play here, I could have just done a couple of chip damage with the Druid of the Grove and got that Sen'jin's Shieldmaster all softened up. Now that's a big, I would say that's a waste of a Hex from our Shaman friend. Against a Shaman you've got to be slightly worried. If he pulls both of his Hexes early, your goal, remember, or my goal here, what we're trying to do is play lots of big taunting minions as soon as we can. And then when we've got enough of them on the table, just overrun our opponent. But obviously what our opponent can do against us is try and use control. They can try and use polymorphs, they can try and use, you name it, silences, all kinds of different stuff, anything that they can use to get our big minions. And there goes the second Hex. So our Shaman is now playing a very aggressive control play. He's trying to keep all of my threats off the table because he's behind on the mana curve. However, I now know that he's used 2 Hexes. He may have silences still. Decision to be made here. He may or may not be able to burst down my Ragnaros. A Sunwalker will set me up very nicely next turn. I'm going to go really aggressive and go straight into a Ragnaros. Now, an equally good play here would have been to Sunwalker, shield up, and then pick off one of those minions. And indeed you can see that because I've dropped my Ragnaros early, I'm actually just picking off these minions, and there goes the silence. He's silenced my Raggy, but of course that makes me a 8/8 attacking minion. This is why Ragnaros is a very solid legendary. Got 2 different uses, and he's a big executing minion in a bunch of ways. Ancestral Spirits, and that's a nice play on the Sen'jin Shieldmaster, because that will return unsilenced, of course. So watch this. Sen'jin Shieldmaster comes back on the table, and it is a tank again where previously I'd silenced it. So again, a nice piece of ancestral spiriting there from our Shaman friend. 1 mana left. He's probably not going to have huge amounts of plays. 3 damage and lightning bolting down, so he really would like to get my Raggy off the table. Now what can I do here? Some interesting plays. Dropping the Sunwalker can be fun. So I'm going to drop that. And again, you can see why Innervate is so good. My opponent is still only on 7 mana. Now, do I want to Faceless Manipulate the Ragnaros? No, because he'll be silenced and not doing anything. Do I want to Faceless Manipulate my other tank? Yes, I've suddenly got 2 shielded, paladin, bubbled tanks. I'm absolutely enjoying that. And you know what? I'm just going to remove this tank. I could wait out this play. He's going to have to... You know what? I'm going to wait out this play. In fact, there's a reasonable chance that a Shaman can do 2 damage to me next go. I'm just going to go for the trade here, just remove that tank from the table. So, I would say really this is mid to late game by now, and you've noted that although I'm in a solid position, my draw power has gone down. If I draw Nourishes, if I draw Wraths, I'm going to be wanting to use those to replenish my hand. The Shaman danger is, of course, that they can flood the table with minions and do a lot of pressure to me. So first thing he's done is remove my bubbles. A Lava Burst, Overload, so he's going to have less mana next go. And an Acidic Swamp Ooze to give him some more table threats. So he's by no means out of this game yet, and indeed I'm not in a position to make solid threats at this point in time because I just don't have the cards. Draw power so key. That's actually going to do nothing because he's just going to get healed up next go. Misplay! I should have actually attacked his hero. Lens and... Three Battle Cry from that Fire Elemental, so when the Shaman gets to late game, that's a threatening card indeed, and you can actually see that, you know what, the tables are turned against me.